Are you the friend who's always being asked for health advice? Now imagine turning that passion into a fulfilling career with our Become a Nutrition Coach program. Step into a world where your enthusiasm for wellness becomes the heart of your own thriving business. With me as your professor and guide and coach on our user-friendly digital platform, you can learn from anywhere at your very own pace. It's perfect for your busy life. Envision empowering others to live their healthiest lives, all while growing a career you love. You're not just gaining a certification here, you're joining a community of like-minded professionals ready to support and celebrate with you every step of the way. So what are you waiting for? It's time to nourish your future and help change lives, including your own. Head over to nutritiouslife.com/BNC for a free class and a sneak peek of the program. Your journey to becoming a nutrition coach begins now. This may have been my favorite conversation I've had on the podcast. I know that's a big statement, but I just really loved this conversation and was truly inspired. Hey everyone, it's Keri Glassman, your host of Living a Nutritious Life, and I just wrapped up an amazing podcast episode with Dr. Amitha Kalaichandran. Dr. Kalaichandran is a physician epidemiologist, a writer, and a wellness longevity tech consultant. She trained at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the University of Toronto Medical School, and the University of Arizona's Fellowship in Integrative Medicine. And she brings a unique perspective to health and healing. As a regular contributor to the New York Times since 2017, her award-winning writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Wired, and The Atlantic, as well as other prestigious publications. Her debut book on healing was recently published, and we discussed it in today's episode. We also chatted about wellness tech, the power of personalized medicine, especially as it relates to wellness tech gadgets like the Oura Ring, continuous glucose monitors, and others. Plus, as I mentioned already, we explored her incredible new book, which looks at healing from a physical, emotional, and spiritual perspective. I love Dr. Kalaichandran's perspective. I felt extremely aligned with her in her respect for traditional medicine and science, in conjunction with her open-mindedness towards what we do not yet know. Did you know that there is science behind praying for others? And there's even a term for it. And if there ever was a time in the world when we needed that, I think it's right now. I could have talked to Dr. Kalaichandran for hours. So let's dive in. I want you to hear this conversation. And as always, please, if you love the podcast, rate, review, and share it. It just takes a moment. Thank you so much. Let's get to it. Welcome to Living a Nutritious Life. I'm Keri Glassman, a celebrity registered dietitian nutritionist. Join me every Tuesday on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms as I bring in some heavy hitters to share the latest in nutrition and wellness science. We dive deep into food, sleep, stress, relationships, and so much more. Your weekly guide to a happier, healthier, more nutritious life. Hello, Amitha. How are you? Welcome to the Living a Nutritious Life podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Keri. It's so great to be here.
I am so excited to chat with you today, and huge congratulations on your recently launched book on healing. I'm so excited to dive into that today. Yeah, so super exciting. So I gave a little bit of a background on you already in our intro, but I really want everyone to learn about you and all of the incredible things that you've done and are doing in your career. So if you could just start with giving us a little bit of a background. We know you're a doctor, but I also know that you're a physician tech consultant, and I really want to know exactly what that means and just all of the good stuff that you're doing in your career right now.
Yeah, definitely. So I trained, so before medical school, I actually trained in epidemiology. So that's really the study of disease patterns. And that was really my first foray into public health and preventative medicine. Then I went to med school. And then after medical school, I did my residency training in pediatrics. So more in that conventional system. And then I pursued integrative medicine, so a fellowship in integrative medicine through Andrew Weil's program at the University of Arizona. And that was really the first time that I learned about elements of healing and health outside of the four walls of a hospital. Along the way, I got the journalism bug. I started writing for places like the New York Times, Wired, The Atlantic about health and healing, as well as medical technology and med tech and digital health. And long story short, that led me into working in tech consulting, working primarily for health and wellness and longevity startups, as well as some big tech companies that are working in this area. And really combining all of my skills to really use healthcare innovation to heal ourselves as individuals as well as our communities.
Wow. It's so cool. I love how you've kind of touched on so many different areas of health and wellness, from traditional medicine to integrative medicine to now sort of using technology, like you said, and in ways that we can better our overall health. I'm kind of obsessed with that space. I mean, you can see I've got my Aura ring on, and I love all kinds of wellness tech gadgets and things. I mean, I think if I could, I would just probably buy every gadget and thing out there just to at least try them. I think it's super fun. Actually, if you can say, I don't know who you're working with now, but what are your gadgets? Like, what are your top few gadgets that you use or that you think there's the most, I guess, future in?
I love this question because it's really about, I think the future of medicine and healthcare and well-being really is about bringing the science and the best that we know in terms of like an evidence-informed wellness approach with our personalized data, right? Because it's not about one size fits all. So the data is really like what we need to be looking at. And so from a gadget point of view or wearables point of view, I have an Apple Watch that I usually wear when I'm working out. I use my Aura Ring primarily to sleep. And the reason that I don't wear it during the day is because I'm afraid I'd lose it. I have so many friends that have like left it like on sinks and that sort of stuff. But I love my Aura Ring. I love my Apple Watch. I wore a continuous glucose monitor for a few times, and that really helped me make some changes in terms of my nutrition and my diet. So I would say those are the top three.
Okay, so I'm really similar to you. I use my Aura Ring. I do wear it all the time, but I really use it and look at the data for sleep and HRV. Those are the two things that I look at the most. And I'm kind of obsessed with watching my sleep and HRV there. So I really enjoy watching that. And then I had an Apple Watch, but I don't use that. And the continuous glucose monitor okay, let's talk about continuous glucose monitor for a second. So I also used a continuous glucose monitor more as just like a little test, just to learn a few things. And that's actually how I find it to be really useful for many people, is more like using it for a set period of time to gather some information, to learn what works for you and doesn't work for you, not necessarily to use all the time. Of course, there are certain people with diabetes or prediabetes that it really helps them to use it all the time. But I think for the large majority of people out there, even using it just for a set period of time, there's so much information that you can gather and learn and then make changes from there. Although I do usually say with the continuous glucose monitor, it is really important to work with someone to interpret that data. Because I think, again, sometimes people get that data and then they take out a whole food group because they think they can't have something or whatever. So I do think it's important to work with someone to interpret that data, like you said, so you have that personal data, but then you can really learn how to use it, to the best.
Absolutely. I think having someone to help you interpret it. And again, these are data points. And I think, the standard is to wear one for a week, maybe 2 weeks max. And really just get a sense of trend. So before, we were always just very subjective in terms of, I would eat this and I'd feel really tired an hour later. And now if you can actually take that subjective information and match it with like data points of, now I know why I was tired. It was probably because my glucose like spiked, right? Yeah. and then crashed. So so it's amazing all the tools that are out there right now.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about it, like it's really interesting. Like you said, you started in epidemiology and now you're in tech consulting where you're looking at all of this data, but it must be really interesting to use that type of data with, in the epidemiology world, right? Have you combined those two areas at all? Are you doing that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the one of the really interesting things about having, so epidemiology is really the study of large populations.
Right.
These like the large cohort studies, the
Mm-hmm.
randomized controlled trials. So they're trying to make associations using really large groups of data, and then basically
Mm-hmm.
trying to make trying to basically report on findings based on that data that may or may not apply to the individual. And so
Right.
most of what we read about in terms of this study found that it's on like large amounts of data. And that's really important from a statistical point of view in order to find causation, right? To say X causes Y, we need large data sets.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of the puzzle, right? Because the tricky part as a physician as well is like, how do you take a large study and apply it to an individual patient who may or may not be represented in that study population? And so that's where I think the personalized data through wearables, through lab tests, through just self-report, marrying those two things together, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you're saying that, because I think that it is, especially when people are listening to, news reports and this study came out and said this, I always say, like, you have to take that information and then, and even when sometimes I actually always say, like, sometimes there's a new study that comes out and says something, and I'll say, okay, you got to take the new study with the like new good studies. You have to make sure it's a good study, right? So good research, new good research. Couple that with old good research, because just because research is older doesn't mean that it's not good. There's some good older data out there too, right? So good old research, good new research, couple that together and then marry that with the individual. You have to take into account if it's applicable to the individual, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, and last question on the tech side of things, because I really find this whole area so interesting. So what is coming soon? Like, what can we expect in the area of tech wellness or what are you really excited about?
I mean, I love that question. So there's so much that's in the pipeline that I see in terms of trends in innovation. So I think we're going to see a lot more interest in startups as well as big tech. So when I talk about big tech, I mean like the Amazons, the Metas, the Apples, the Googles, in terms of looking at this personalized element of health. So combining wearables, combining lab tests, combining our personalized health data, of course, with security and privacy and consent, and really building a picture so that we can have these more personalized health roadmaps that apply more specifically to us. I can see that, and I can see that trend is manifesting in many different ways. That's what I'm really excited about, is I think we're going to really move away from this cookie cutter approach to wellness to being incredibly personalized, using our own data. And I think what's really exciting is that more and more of us are going to be more informed about what's happening in our own bodies. I always like to say that data helps give us a story, right? Our bodies are constantly speaking to us, constantly giving us information. Some of us have been more attuned to it than others, but really this is the time where we're going to actually be able to decipher the code. And the code is through these data points, through wearables, through lab tests, through self-report, all those things together.
Yeah.
To the right health choices for us.
Right. I think it kind of allows us to have some of those light bulb moments, like, oh, that's why I always feel this way, when I eat that, or, oh, that's why, when I don't get sleep, this happens, or whatever. I mean, I do. I think it's really, I totally agree. I think that's really, I like how you said that the data points help tell the story, because again, even if we are in touch with our bodies and what makes us feel good and what throws us off, it fills in the gaps. I mean, even things like, I can't really drink alcohol because I get really terrible migraines. Like, it doesn't even matter if I have a teeny bit of alcohol and I've done a genetic test and I know that I don't detoxify alcohol well, like I have that. So it's just, that's telling the story. That's obviously, just a small little tiny example there, but it's telling a story. It makes it make sense. That's why. And there's also things I can do there to help metabolize alcohol better if I wanted to, right? So I again, just a small example, but I think it's just, information is power, right? So, and
it just allows us to be more informed. And I love the alcohol example because the Oura Ring is I think one of the studies that they ran through their company was basically seeing how people responded to changes in their sleep based on having one drink. So we know that alcohol it's in the news a lot now in terms of new policies, that sort of stuff right now. But even one drink can impact your ability to get into REM sleep, stage 3 sleep, and your overall sleep architecture. And if you're wearing something like a wearable, like an Oura ring or a similar ring or a similar device, you can actually track that in real time. Like on the nights that you haven't drink of alcohol, what is your sleep like? Right. That's really fascinating. With the continuous glucose monitor that I wore for a couple of weeks, I found that I was less tolerant of oat milk than I thought. I would always spike, whereas
oat milk always gets a bad rap with those CGMs.
A friend of mine doesn't have that spike, right? So the point is, it's not about making any given thing like bad or good. You know what I mean? There's
it's like what works for you.
What works for you, and also it's about making that choice. Using alcohol as an example, like doesn't mean you have to necessarily cut out alcohol, but it means that we can take that step and ask ourselves, is this a night where I can afford losing my sleep? Do I need to be on my game tomorrow? Do I need to be emotionally regulated because I'm going into a stressful situation tomorrow or a presentation? And then you're going to be able to make a choice that makes sense for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny you said it, because that is literally how I make the decision whether or not I can risk having one drink.
Yeah,
I do say, look, what's okay. If it's a weeknight, I would say 95% of the time, absolutely not. But even on a weekend, very often it's absolutely not. I can't risk it. I have too long of a day tomorrow, or I don't want to can't risk feeling like crap tomorrow. So anyway, okay, I know I said that was my last question on that, but just one more thing on this. It's interesting though. I think about all of like the wearables and the wellness tech. I think that there's some people that have really embraced it and love all the information. And I think there are some people that they find it overwhelming and almost like too much information. Like they already have too much information. And then now this is more information that they have to kind of digest and synthesize to make better choices. And it's overwhelming. So on a positive note, I'm curious what you think about it. I think that as it becomes more the norm to have this data and to have different types of wellness tech, wearables, et cetera, I think that more people are going to be used to it, and I think will embrace it more, which, I mean, to me, that's where I see it going, because I do right now see some people being overwhelmed by it. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really important point. I mean, there is such a thing as too much information with anything, right? Too much news, too much whatever. And being able to decipher the signal from the noise is crucial, right? So understanding like the bottom line, like what does this mean? Like to make meaning out of like a constellation of stuff, right? And the meaning part is really important because that's what helps us make choices. If we have too much information and we can't decipher what it all means, we're in this almost like paralytic sort of decision state where we don't really know what to do, what to eat. Right. I'm hearing this thing, I'm hearing that thing. My data says this. It's a lot, right? I think that's where the power, of even working with someone like a coach, physician really comes in. And also I think the best technology is the technology that works, the technology that people can understand, right? So even when you think about some of these companies, if you look at their user interface, the ones that present the data in the clearest way are the ones that are going to rise above the rest, right? Because no one has time to stream through different data points and decide. So I do think that's really important. I think the other point is, there is a danger, and I do see this sometimes with people that become almost obsessed with their data. It's another element of control. So if someone has a tendency of being, leaning towards that more anxious sort of state, then having that data can actually just cause more anxiety, right? As opposed to more relief with having that information. So knowing that balance for yourself is also really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point there. Okay, I'm going to switch gears completely. I want to ask you about your incredible book that just came out. So your book is called On Healing. I want to hear about the book, and I want to hear about why you decided to write it and why you decided to write it now.
Yeah, so I had a really interesting experience in my medical work after medical school, where I found myself in a situation where I wasn't sleeping very well. I wasn't eating the right things. I was constantly exhausted. I was burnt out effectively. And I was in a hospital environment that wasn't really aligned with me. And I hesitate to use the word toxic. I do think toxic work environments are out there. I think that's a big problem. 70% of Americans have worked in a toxic work environment in their life. By that, I mean, micromanaging, bullying, harassment, all that sort of stuff. But it just wasn't aligned with me for many reasons. And I found myself at this point of knowing that there was no surgery or pill that was going to solve my problem, right? And I just spent several years in medical training learning all about surgeries and medications, right? And so that led me to pursue an integrative medicine fellowship, where I learned about some of the pillars that you've talked about. So sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, mindfulness, social connection being a huge one, as well as having that sense of purpose, or in Japan, what they call the ikigai. So
we call it love more at Nutritious Life. We call that the love more pillar.
Yes, the love more, and and how all of these elements were so important in terms of helping me heal. And so that led me on this journey to really read more and learn more about all of these different elements of healing, speak to the pioneers, speak to patients that really, leaned all the way in terms of one of those pillars. And I started writing for the New York Times. So I had just done a journalism fellowship, and the New York Times picked up one of my first articles, and I wrote a bunch of articles for them. And then the opportunity came up to write a book and really dive deeper into these elements. And so that process actually started in 2020. We know what happened in 2020, right? So it was right before the pandemic that I was like, got the book deal. And then it was like, suddenly I was, as all of us were, we were in this situation that none of us could have expected. That was the ultimate real kind of, where all of us were really faced with this limitation around healing and health, right? So it ends up being very timely in terms of the conversations shifted very quickly in terms of healing outside the healthcare system, in terms of how to reimagine healthcare and wellness. So the timing of the book, I think, is really great. I'm really blessed with that. But that was really the journey to it. And I've been really enjoying the conversations that I've had since completing the book. The book just came out a few days ago. I don't know when this airs, but so far I'm just really thrilled to be able to share, these ideas with like minds.
Amazing. Congrats again. Okay. So you talk about healing, you talk about physically, spiritually, emotionally. Tell us a little bit about each of those areas and what you focus on in the book, and I guess also just what that journey has been like for yourself.
Did you know that there is one phase of sleep that most people fail to get enough of? And this one phase of sleep is responsible for most of your body's daily rejuvenation, repair, energy, and controlling hunger, and even the hormones that affect our weight, and so much more. I'm talking about the deep sleep phase. And you probably know by now that sleep deep is a pillar of a nutritious life. So there you have it. It's for good reason. You probably also know that I'm a little sleep obsessed, not with sleeping a lot per se, rather with getting good quality sleep, because I've been a not so great sleeper most of my life. And when I sleep well, I feel like I can conquer the world. And when I don't, well, not so much. So why don't most people get enough of this one most important phase of sleep? A big reason is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and magnesium increases GABA, a neurotransmitter, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level, which is critical for sleep. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response system. Those with magnesium deficiency usually have higher stress levels, which negatively impact sleep as well. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. I used to just take magnesium at night, but now I take it at night for relaxation and sleep, and in the morning for brain function and stress management. Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind and help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. The deep sleep benefits are really noticeable. I track my sleep. You may see me post this on Instagram, and I can tell you I see and feel the difference. For an exclusive offer, go to buyoptimizers.com/NL Keri and use promo code NL Keri for 10% off any order. I'll also put that in the show notes.
Yeah, so there's definitely different elements of healing. So there's about 12 different components that I talk about in the book. Um, and one of the components includes grief and letting go. One of the components includes optimizing your workplace culture. One of the components includes faith and spirituality and mediumship and psychics and tarot cards. And, so all of the elements that many people go to when they're seeking that sense of healing. So in terms of like purely physical health, there's only really one chapter that covers that. And that's chapter 2, which talks about how our cells and our tissues heal. And that is probably the most basic science focused. So any sort of science nerds out there that are really interested in how do cells heal themselves? How does DNA repair itself when it's damaged? Because it's constantly damaged. So that's the one chapter that focuses primarily on that. The rest really focuses on that interlink between the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. And so it's a system that all works together.
Well, I love that because I think so many people focus on, like you said, your chapter 2. So many people focus on that, even if they're not specifically focused on the cells, they're still focused on the physical side of things. They're not as focused on the emotional and spiritual side. So, and like you said, they do all go together.
Yeah, exactly. And, it impacts the physical, right? So there's the nutrition chapter covers some of Walter Longo's work. So he's obviously a pioneer in fasting, and he talks about, very eloquently how fasting actually helps our healthy cells, right? And helps our body heal, like the actual science behind it. And then the social connection chapter covers some really interesting research around how people who had wounds actually healed faster when they were socially connected to their loved ones. So it's actually a significant, a scientific evidence base for feeling socially connected, because our bodies are less in a fight or flight sort of high stress state, which actually helps our cells repair better. So I think all of that is fascinating. And again, it links to the physical, but it's so much about the system all working together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of, even just those, I think most people are familiar with that plant example where if you say nice things to a plant, it's going to grow better, right? Or if you say nice things to a glass of water and then you freeze it, it's going to have pretty crystals versus whatever. I know I'm not sharing those examples perfectly, but you know what I'm talking about. But it's just that's even the part of even just speaking nicely to yourself, right? Yeah. But also being around people and support and all of that. So you just maybe think of all of that. But do you think everyone has an area where they need to heal?
I think we're constantly in a process of healing. So I love the idea of healing as a return to wholeness. And that's how I define it in my book. So traditionally in medicine, in conventional medicine, healing is the same thing as curing. It's it's an equivalent thing. So if you're healed, you are cured from the disease no longer exists. But I much prefer this idea of a return to wholeness. So regardless of whatever it is that ails you, it could be mental, spiritual, physical, all those things together. Once you're able to integrate and heal that and really return to wholeness, I think that's really the key. And it's not about returning to who you were before the injury, but about integrating it all together and becoming a more resilient self. And I think all of us are in that state. Healing is never a place that we arrive. It's a dynamic thing that we're always engaged in every single day.
So you don't think you're ever done?
I don't think you're ever done. No, that's my personal belief. And I would say, there's lots of great examples, right? So if you're someone, for example, that has had some emotional trauma, of which almost all of us have had, I would say all of us have had, we are always tested in that way, right? It could be it could be a remark that a stranger says. It could be someone cutting us off in traffic. It could be a family member, being short with us. We're always tested in that way. Are we going to lean into our most whole, worthy, healing self, or are we going to resort back to the trauma? And it's not that one is right or one is wrong. It's just that we're always going to be challenged with ways that we can kind of continue to integrate, continue to heal.
Right. So the more aware you are of those traumas and the more you work on the healing, the better tools you have and behaviors to, I guess, respond to situations as they come up again. So you can choose that better, healthier path when those situations come up. Yeah. Yeah. And I know you talk a lot about all of this in the book. It's so good. And I love how you broke it up into these different chapters. So let's talk about chapter 7 for a moment. You talk about intuition, you talk about the placebo effect. What surprised you most in your research there?
So there were two things that surprised me. The first was the research around what they call intercessory prayer, which basically means praying for other people. And so there's been some really interesting research that has found that praying for other people can actually help their healing, especially from physical conditions. So that was surprising. The limitations of those studies is, as you can imagine, there's not very many of them. They're not huge studies. It's hard to randomize, studies like that. But it definitely caused me to sort of question, what all the things that we don't know, the things that science can't necessarily explain. The second thing that surprised me was knowing just from, people that I know, friends in my life, myself, how many people lean on things that are, maybe very much the opposite of what we would typically consider science. So whether it's speaking to a psychic, tarot cards, types of meditation that sort of link to the spirit world. And I think we live in a really interesting time where there's more and more people that are exploring those ideas. And I think we also are seeing a shift even in just physics and quantum mechanics, trying to, merge these two worlds together. And I love, stories of synchronicity and serendipity. And all of us have stories like that. I have a story like that in the book where I talk about a white rabbit, jumping onto my path.
Love these stories. I could talk about stories like this forever. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot more of that, by the way, in the book that it got cut out. So if I write like an essay or something later, I may just focus on that. But I think it really causes us to question, like science is really, really important, right? There's absolutely no doubt we, as a society, we've evolved so much in science. However, science evolves, right? And there's a lot of things that our current science cannot explain that may one day explain, right?
Yes, absolutely.
100 years down the road. That can explain some of these things. So I would say that most surprised me for sure. I'm definitely much more open than I was when I started the book.
I say that a lot about with nutrition. I always say nutrition is a young science, and there's a lot of things that we don't know. So there's a lot of things that we might know anecdotally that have not been researched properly yet, but we see a lot of evidence. And if it's not going to be harmful and it may be helpful, you don't necessarily need the good research studies there to show you that. We have anecdotal evidence it's not going to be harmful. It's been done for hundreds of years, and hopefully the science, the research will catch up to it, but it's just maybe not there yet. So, and I also say, with everything at Nutritious Life, I always say we have to lean on the science, but be open-minded to the things we don't know yet. And I think that's really super important. So I love that you talk about that. And one thing that I'm so glad that you brought up in the book was the placebo effect, because I use that example a lot. I feel like I've actually even talked about that on this podcast before, that it's funny. There's a lot of people that I think are very, sort of roll their eyes at, manifestation and all of that. And, they sort of, roll their eyes. That's all woo woo and this and that. But I say, but think about, the placebo effect. You believe many people that, again, think things like manifesting and all that are woo woo, have no problem understanding the placebo effect, because it's something that's been used in traditional medicine and traditional research studies. It's kind of like, and I'm like, that's manifesting, really, right? That's like believing in something and making it and making it happen. So anyway, I love that was in that you brought that up as well.
Just to sort of piggyback on that. So first of all, I think it's brilliant what you just said around understanding the risks and benefits and making choices based on the science, but also the likelihood of harm, because we don't talk about that enough, right? If you see something helps you and it's not harmful, right? Do it, right?
Exactly.
Maybe whatever, it's fine. So I definitely agree with that. I think, everyone should get the book. It's called Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn. It's an old book. It's a small book, but it basically can be summarized in one diagram, which is how science evolves. It's a circle. And every single time we have more and more evidence that shows something totally new, science shifts, right? It shifts to embrace that new paradigm. And then getting back to the placebo effect, what you were just saying is, it's about mindset. If you have a really therapeutic relationship with your healthcare provider or coach or, whatnot, that in itself is healing, right? Because we're in a calmer state, we're dampening the stress response, hypothalamic pituitary axis. All of those things are really conducive to healing. So regardless of what they advise or prescribe, hopefully it's something helpful. That in itself has benefit. And I think that's how the placebo effect works, is that the sense of, okay, I'm taking something that is helpful for me, or I believe it's helpful for me. And your body responds in that way that it's almost in that healing receptive state.
Yeah, such a good point. And I love that you brought up that relationship between the individual client or patient and practitioner or coach. It's really, really so super important. Oh, so good. So how do you suggest someone start this process of healing? I mean, aside from, of course, buying the book, but how do you suggest someone starts? Because I think even when people think about something like even just their nutrition, it can be really overwhelming. Where do I begin? What do I do? Right. And that's obviously something I help people with, but when it comes to where do I start with exercise? Where do I start with nutrition? And then when you start to think about, okay, where do I start with my spiritual and emotional healing? It could feel overwhelming to people. So like we said before, with so much information and maybe so much to do. So how do you help people just start this journey, or where should they start?
Right. So I would say that I would encourage everyone to start where they can, right? So I think the first thing is identify what area in your life is in most need of healing. And another way to sort of think about it is, what area in your life is not as aligned with your true self as it could be, right? It could be something like work. It could be something like you only have time to eat one meal a day, and it's something that is not aligned with you. It's not satisfying you. It's not nourishing you. It could be that your schedule is so busy that you can't get sleep. So figure out which of those elements is the cause of your sort of feeling a lack of thriving, and then start there, right? And know that even when you make one small change, it could be, using the example of sleep, it could be, okay, I'm going to turn off my screens at whatever time, or I'm going to avoid alcohol, every time I'm asked, I might drink one glass of alcohol a month, or once a week, versus once every day or once every couple days. Making those small shifts, you're going to see an improvement in your well-being and your sense of health and healing. And then, all of those other elements are going to start lining up too, right? It's sort of like these planets lining up.
Yes. I mean, that's a nutritious life. I love it. But that's exactly what I talk about, the nutritious life. I mean, exactly. When you sleep well, you're in the morning, your hormones are even more balanced, where you're going to actually crave healthier foods than if you don't sleep well. And then you're going to have more energy, and then you're going to think better. You're going to, it all goes together.
You're going to have better interactions with, with your partner, with your loved ones, and not absolutely. You're in a more sort of grounded state.
Yeah. And it all works together. I always say physiologically and behaviorally, those all work together.
Yeah. And seeking out really important, aligned social connections is something I talk about in my book, Online and Offline. I think online social connections can be really nourishing, as long as we have a really good sense of how much time are we spending online. Are the interactions, or at least a good chunk of them, mutually beneficial? Are they reciprocated? Are they people that we might engage with offline? Really making those choices too, because people are nutritious and nourishing for us too, right? On a spiritual level as well.
So, perfect time to ask you my last question, although I could talk to you forever, and I cannot wait to finish the book. So how do you live your most nutritious life on a daily basis? What do you do to ignite your nutritious life on a daily basis?
So I would say I live very intentionally. So I make very intentional choices about what energy I want around me, whether it's food, whether it's activities, whether it's people, whether it's professional opportunities. I would say that's definitely the number one thing is I pause before I say yes to things. And that's a massively liberating thing, to have that choice. On a more sort of practical level, sleep is something I prioritize. I try to, I really do try to get that 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I know that, that alone makes everything else easier, which we talked about.
Absolutely.
So I would say those two things for sure. And
so
then
good.
the third is like really aligning with purpose and my ikigai. So, and I think with the book, that's really come into sort of full circle there, is like being able to share my journey, but also share the research and the science, and empower people with the tools. Like, for example, at the end of the book, because you mentioned the whole kind of, there's a lot of information out there on different studies. I was able to reprint a guide that I did for the New York Times about how to understand medical studies. And it's a short guide.
Oh, I love that.
Basically figure out, like, does this apply to me? Does this need to,
that's amazing. So helpful for people.
To, change my behaviors based on that. So being able to empower people with those resources so that we can all heal together. Because I really do think the best healing really takes place when we're collectively on this journey. And I think more and more of us are.
And I think the world, for so many reasons in so many places in the world, needs that now more than ever. So I think your book is going to be so helpful for so many people. So thank you so much for being here today. I really am so grateful for your time and for just sharing your incredible wisdom with our audience. So in the show notes, we're going to have a link to Amitha's book, and you can find it anywhere books are sold, on healing. It is such a great resource, and you are just such a pleasure to chat with. I feel healed. I feel like I am healing, I should say. Never healed, but I am healing just talking to you. You are amazing.
That'll be the bonus chapters, is really great podcasts like yours.
Thank you so much.